All right. I'm happy to introduce tonight's presenter. I first saw Ian Anderson tie a few years ago on YouTube, and after the first video that came up in my feed, I subscribed to his channel. He ties very clean flies that are accurate to history. I asked him to tie for you all, and he was happy to do so. So a little bit about Ian. Aside from fly fishing and tying for over 40 years, Ian worked at Fly Masters of Indianapolis for 18 years. 13 of those years, he was the primary person running the beginning and intermediate fly tying classes almost every Saturday. This allowed him to hone his teaching skills as well as refine his fly tying skills and knowledge. Eventually, this led to the creation of Dressed Irons YouTube channel and an avenue to continue teaching and learning about fly tying. This has led him to focusing in recent years on feather wing streamers and classic wet flies, which you all know is right up my alley. Specifically, he's tumbled down the rabbit hole of Carrie Stevens streamers and the pursuit of learning her methods for pattern creation, as well as why and how she tied the streamer the way she did, which inevitably leads to the realization that we're all just students and there's always more to learn. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Ian. And let me remove myself here.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mike. First off, for inviting me to do this. Actually, I've been wanting to, through my YouTube channel and locals, wanting to do some live video tying, but it just seemed like such a conflagration of equipment and everything. I just haven't got off my backside and done it. But this fortunately gave me the impetus to do that. So I'm very glad to help you. And I'm also very glad to do this for all the veterans out there. And I thank you all for your service, all of you that are tuning in tonight. It's very much appreciated. What I'm going to do here is I've got 3 cameras set up. So you've got a shot of me. So when I'm talking, for the most part, to you and answering questions, I'll have that camera on. I got another camera here that's going to focus on the actual fly and the tying of the fly. And as I'm doing that, then afterward, I've got another angle here of my tying desk, because I want to go through the steps for how I process the hackles and everything and then form the wings. Carrie Stevens had a unique way of doing that. And I think it's worth sharing. It's certainly, if you're into tying these kinds of streamers, processing them ahead of time and gluing up your wings ahead of time makes it a lot easier to tie these. So with that, I will go ahead and change over and start working on the fly. This is a streamer she did called the Dr. White, and it's a very, very basic Carrie Stevens pattern. All of her patterns were on these very, very long streamer hooks. Usually they were anywhere from 9 to 10x long hook. She favored the Alcox hooks generally from about a size 10 to a size 2. So some of them got very, very large. Most of her streamers all have a lot of the same components. This one has a silver tag to it, and it does have a tail of some golden pheasant. It has a black floss body with a silver rib. It then has a pink throat to it, and then an underwing of peacock herl, and then the wing itself, which I'll elaborate on, and it has a little bit of a collar of some soft yellow hackle. The one thing, if you get into looking at her flies and everything, you really start to see a pattern over time that a lot of the bodies are the exact same bodies. And so it's the same techniques over and over again for different flies. So I'm going to go ahead and take this out, and I'm using this is a Partridge CS15 in a size 4. It is a 10x long Carrie Stevens hook. Part of the reason that I'm using this particular hook is it has to do with the size of the hackles that I have. The saddle that I have is a Whiting's American Rooster saddle, and these hackles right here are pretty much long enough to process and actually make into the wings. If you do enough of these, you'll find your saddles will have a lot of these feathers taken out, and then you end up with longer or shorter ones, in which case you would have to go to a little bit smaller, either smaller size or even just a different model hook. So keep that in mind when you're tying some of these. You got to have some hackles that are going to fit the actual hook. So now I'll keep an eye out on the chat area if anybody has any questions or anything they want to put in there. And if I can't answer it here, then I'll somehow get the answers to Mike, and he can, I guess, put it in the description for the video or something like that.
So Ian, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
This is a 10X hook.
Uh-huh.
Is it historical accuracy the reason you're doing a 10X hook, the feathers themselves? Kind of go over, why such a long hook? A 6X is still quite a
Okay.
long hook.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I think historically she did. She liked the real long streamer hooks because many up in the Rangeley area, they're trolling for landlocked salmon up there in large brook trout. And so they have, smelt up there, other bait fish that are very, very long. So they're looking for a 3 or 4 inch long bait fish. And some of her patterns even resemble small brook trout, things like this. So there, a lot of people up there just going for these big fish. And we all know big fish like, big food. And so I think that's the primary reason why she liked these. My research has shown me, at least what I've read so far, that also while she was tying these and coming up with these patterns, they were all kind of new in the area. Featherwing streamers, I'm pretty certain were probably tied before some were being developed before she got into it. But by the time she did and her patterns got out, it became more and more popular. And as we all know, as soon as the new fly comes on the block, we all have to tie different variations of it, different colors, all this kind of stuff, but keeping with that kind of fly. Now, these can be tied on smaller 6X hooks, even if you want to, for like where I'm at with the warm water fishing, most of our bait fish are only about 1.5 to 2 inches long. So even a 4 or 5X hook, you can tie these on. Now you're going to be, selecting feathers that are going to work for that size. That's the only other thing. But traditionally, I think that's why she chose these very large hooks. There, if you look at some of the Mike Martinique patterns and a few other tires, they do tie on some shorter 7X hooks, and they have some that they've tied on. I find it interesting, just a quick side note, these long hooks, the interesting thing about them is that when you do hook a fish, the advantage is actually in the fish's favor, because the longer the hook shank, the more leverage the fish has when it's fighting to wiggle this out of its mouth. So this is why you also see some of these in tandem rigs. They'll have the same style, but they'll have a rear hook and then a front hook, or even just shank to it, because then the fish has less leverage to work that hook out. So I am going to start tying the fly. This has a black floss body to it. Now, a lot of them that have red floss or yellow floss or something like that, you want to start out with a white thread. I'm using a Danville's 210 denier Fly Masters in white. If you use a dark thread under that floss, a rayon or silk floss, it will actually darken up the color in the water. Now, I don't have to on this because it's a black floss, but it's just a matter of habit. And also I wanted to just point that out during this lesson here, that often you're going to use a white floss underneath. By the way, this also, Mike, goes for wet flies. If you have your classic wet flies that have a floss body, you're going to want to have a lighter colored thread under the lighter colored floss. Now I generally start all of these with a layer of thread along the hook shank here. You don't have to, but there's different reasons why I do that. I'm going to, at this point, tie in the tinsel for the tag. The tag on this is just some silver tinsel. I'm using this is a Danville size 10 silver and gold mylar tinsel. I'm going to tie this with the gold side up. And then I'm going to advance my thread back. I'm not certain just how wide these tags and things are. I've read different things. Some in the Hilliard book, some of them are very, very, maybe 1/8 of an inch wide. I generally go for about 1/4 of an inch wide. Still trying to figure that one out. But because the Dr. White has a tail on it, we have to actually apply the tag first, and then I'll have to tie in the tail. Then I can put in the tinsel rib and the floss body to complete the body. So I get about 5 or 6 wraps in there. I think aesthetically, a lot of people like to have all of this really, really nice and smooth when they're tying these in. So you kind of want to watch your thread wraps here, that you don't bulk things up. At the same time, if you're tying this as a fishing fly, I don't think the fish are really going to care if it's got a little bit of a lumpy, bumpy bottom or body to it. So the tail is actually some golden pheasant tippet fibers here. And I'm going to select, I don't know, maybe about 15 barbs or so here, and cut those off. I like to roll these together here so that I have the brighter colors kind of on the outside. I'm going to tie this in so the black band is generally just about the bend of the hook. Now on these flies, again, if you're trying to keep things nice and smooth, a lot of times because you're tailing material, you will get a bump back there. And I imagine if you're going to present this to somebody or frame it, you want to take a little bit of care to try and smooth that out or something. But there again, if you're fishing this, I'm not concerned about it. So next I'm going to put in the tinsel for my rib. And I'm going to lash that in with just one wrap. I'm going to extend this just up into the body. If I'm really wanting just a nice smooth body here, and the tinsel isn't that big of an issue, but I might run it all the way up to the end of the body so everything stays nice and smooth there. The floss on this is a Danville. I'm using a Danville 4-strand rayon in black. This also, if you want, you could run all the way up to the other end if you wanted to keep that a nice smooth underbody. It's not something that I'm generally that concerned about, even if I'm presenting this or framing it or something, because as long as you're careful, you don't end up with a whole lot of bumps. You do want to take care when you're wrapping on top of this on the way back to the end of the body that you don't pull so hard on your thread that you'll actually start to twist that floss around the hook shank, and you get kind of a spiral working up there. So this is the kind of the boring part of these flies, because this hook is so long, you have to go from one end to the other. By the way, that's why I'm using a 210 denier here, is that it helps me. It's a little bit thicker, so I can go from one end of the shank to the other just a little bit quicker. So I'll end with my thread right here at the end of the body, which is going to be right about where the eye return is on this particular hook. Then I'm going to wrap the floss in. You want to make certain, this is actually a trick I learned from a video Don Bastian did many years ago, working with floss. If you've ever wrapped floss in on a body and you have, as you're going forward, you have strands of that starting to advance in front. The reason is you don't have all those fibers under the same tension at the same angle. You have to have it a certain angle to advance forward. So if you, as you're wrapping the first wrap around, stroke those a little bit, kind of pinch them and get them all under the same tension, you're less likely going to have that floss kind of separate and drift on you. This is the part of my videos where I usually have some music going because it's kind of long and tedious. So if anybody wants to hum a tune, go right ahead. So once that's wrapped up to the end of the body, I'll secure that with the white thread. Trimming away the excess here. Now I will attach the rib. Now on these flies, by the way, there isn't a set number of wraps for the rib. On your classic wet flies, you generally have, it's 5 turns of the rib. And even a lot of your classic Atlantic salmon flies and spay flies will have 5 turns for whatever reason. On these, it's not so important that you have a set number as much as they're all pretty much evenly spaced. So you may end up with, on a certain size hook, you may end up with 7, you may end up with 10, but that's fine as long as they're all pretty much evenly spaced. At least that's all the literature and everything that I have read when they talk about the wraps of the rib. That's what they mention, is that just keep it evenly spaced. So with that up front here, I'll go ahead and tie that off. Now, one thing I want to point out here real quick is I have another fly, a Carrie Stevens pattern here. This one's here is called the Pink Beauty. And this one, as you can see, has a bucktail belly to it. Many of her streamers have a white bucktail belly to them. This one, I'm not certain white. It's all white, so I don't know why it doesn't have it. But one thing I wanted to point out, if you're going to tie any of them that have bucktail in it, you want to keep that bucktail very sparse. A lot of people will tie these, and you've probably seen, even like when people tie a Clouser Deep Minnow, when they're just starting to tie them, they put way too much bucktail on it. The reason that you don't want that much bucktail on the bottom, you're just looking for a little color, but that bucktail will add some buoyancy to the underside of the fly. So this won't track well in the water. It'll keel off to different sides or possibly even invert if you have too much bucktail on the underside for that belly. This one does not have any bucktail in there. So I'm going to actually start tying in the throat on this. Now the throat is just a pink throat. I'm using some pink schlappen for this. And all I'm doing is I'm taking a pretty full feather like this, and I'm just isolating some of the barbs on one side like so. and then I'll just peel those off, and I'll then clump those together and tie them in. You're going to want to tie these in 3 different clumps. There's one, these usually go about halfway down the body. There's one clump that goes right on the very bottom of the hook shank. And as you wrap that in, you advance your thread forward a few wraps. Now we're putting in 2 more clumps that are going to be more or less on the side. The reason that she did this is she's trying to use, or I should say, I'm trying to use this hackle here to help cover up thread wraps. This is an interesting technique. If you do take a look at the Hilliard book, or a woman by the name of Sharon Wright did a book, Featherwing Streamers, a number of years ago. That's not the title of it, but that is the author, where she deconstructed a blue devil, I do believe. And they talk about how Carrie would tie in her bucktail way back here. Most people would tie that in kind of up close to the head. She tied it way back here, and then she would advance her thread forward for the throat. The idea being that the throat here on the sides would help to kind of cover up some of those thread wraps on the sides. It's a interesting technique, and I don't know, this is where the kind of my interest lies, in terms of, I don't know if she did that because of the silk thread that they used, and even some of the materials that they had. I don't know. There's got to be some techniques that are done a certain way because of the tools that you have at the time. Whereas ours these days, we have finer threads and such, that I don't know if you'd have to do that, but that's just me thinking out loud. So I tie this other one in on the side, and you can see now I'm pretty much forming the base of the head of the fly here. And if I did all that right, I have some schlappen that is kind of covering both sides a little bit, keeping in mind that this wing, when it gets tied in, will also cover up a bit of that thread wraps. Now I'm going to advance my thread forward, and I'm going to change over to a black thread. The Dr. White has just a black head on it. I'm using this is a Danville 70 denier in black. And this is just my technique. Other tyers have their technique on how they do that. Some will put in a 2 or 3 turn whip finish on the thread that they're taking off. I just wrap it down in with the next thread and just keep proceeding. So I'll come back here and just smooth this off a little bit. And then I'm not quite at the very back end of the head yet. The next is her recipe. Actually, it often includes, and at least in the Hilliard book, this is how they wrote them out. I don't know if this is exactly how Carrie wrote it out, but the wing is described as having 4 to 6 strands of peacock curl, and then this component of the wing, which is 2 white hackles on each side. So I generally refer to it as kind of an underwing, because this particular wing is, in my opinion, is this hackle plus the shoulder and the cheek. But
Ian, when you mentioned the Hilliard book, what book is that?
Here, I'll show you real quick. Let me get this right. This is the what is it, Graydon and Leslie Hilliard book on Carrie Stevens flies. I don't know if that there. That's where my focus is at. This is a fantastic book. It encompasses basically everything about Carrie Stevens and how she got into this. Actually, her husband, just a little trivia here, her husband was a guide up in Maine. And one of his real good clients actually talked her into tying some flies. She was a milliner by trade, which is somebody who makes hats and things like this for ladies. And so he sent her a bunch of hackles and hooks and tinsels and things like this. And she just started tying these. She has never took a lesson from anybody. Nobody, actually, I take that back. Only one person ever saw her actually tie a fly. And I'm going to touch base on that later. But she never took any lessons. So everything she did, she learned. And she also tied all of these by hand. So she didn't have a vise or anything, which is another reason why I think some of the techniques for the belly and for the throat and everything, when you're tying by hand, it's just a different way of putting things together, especially with heavy silks, than if you're tying on a vise with smaller thread. But I will, Mike, I will get you a link to that book on Amazon after this that we can put in the description or whatever.
Thank you.
Sure. So the peacock herl, I picked 4 strands here off of just a regular old peacock feather. There's no rocket science to this. You just want to get the tips fairly even. They don't have to be perfect. You're going to tie these in, and generally these are going to be about the length of the tail. If I had a belly on here, it would be about the same length. It's usually about 1/4 of an inch to 3/8 of an inch beyond the bend of the hook. And the other part of the wing will actually be about the same length or just a little bit longer. So I'll trim away the excess there and then smooth this off a little bit, and then I shall put the wings in. Now these wings, as I mentioned, are 2 white hackles right here, and then there is a jungle cock body feather for a shoulder, and then there is the jungle cock for a cheek on this. For me, if I process these ahead of time, it's really easy. One, I've got a whole match set here because I processed these together. And when I go to tie them in, I can simply cut the excess rachis off right here and then just tie these in on each side. It's rather interesting because there's 2 different styles for the wings that are tied in on these feather wing streamers. Some of them are tied in right along the side like this. Now that means this is actually on the top, but it's actually more towards my side on the top, not right on the side of the hook. And what this does, get this in here right, what this does is it lets the whole feather flow right down alongside of the body. So it kind of obscures that a little bit. Even while you're fishing, some of it is obscured up here, but it all flows down that side of the body. There's another way to tie these in. And I don't see Carrie Stevens, or at least the samples that I've seen, doing this, but other people who have tied feather wing streamers will sometimes tie them in so that they're right up on top here and they're actually kind of cocked up a little bit. So you see the whole body underneath and the wing kind of comes up at a slight angle.
It's interesting you mentioned that because a lot of the like black ghost and spruce streamer, the light spruce streamer are some of my favorites. Those I tie with the wing up.
Yes.
And I can see the value of kind of obscuring the hook a little bit.
Right.
But also you don't want to obscure the body too much, like on a spruce streamer. You have the red and the peacock. You don't want to cover that up too much because it's part of the color of the fly, if you will.
Right. Right. I agree. And I don't know, here again, I don't know how many of her flies that she tied were more for trolling fishing versus,
Right.
casting out and swinging. This, in my opinion, is made more for trolling. I'll talk in a minute when I show you how I process the wings, but having this all glued together up here and anchored here
Mhm.
keeps all of this pretty steady.
Right.
Whereas in the water, when this is swimming, this back end is actually going to be, just flipping all around. And I don't know if that's the preferred method for a trolling fly versus maybe a swinging fly.
Okay. And one more thing, just so you know, John went ahead and put a link to that Hilliard book in
Oh,
the
thank you.
chat. So that's
Thank you.
already in the chat.
Yeah, it is, again, it's one of those things. If you enjoy some of the history of these things and get into these flies, there's so much information in there. I've reread that book about 4 times, and it seems every time I go through it, I learn a little bit more. And some of
That's
it, I
kind
think, go
of
ahead.
like what I do with the Ray Bergman book.
Yeah, yeah, same thing. As a matter of fact, I'm actually working through a whole bunch of the flies in Ray Bergman for that same reason. But it's just rather interesting because you can read, the recipes on these and tie them, and you can put them together. But sometimes you're left with, why did they do it that way? And it's not till maybe you're fishing these or you do a bunch of them and you see how they're fished and what they're trying to represent that you then start to understand why exactly they're done that way. Now, the Dr. White, the last thing, I went ahead and smoothed the head off a little bit, and I'm going to bring my thread close to the back end here because there is a collar of some, it just says a few turns of a soft yellow hackle. So for this, I'm using, again, schlappen. Schlappen feathers are my preferred feathers for a lot of these wet flies, even for the tailing material and things like that. All I'm going to do here is just isolate the tip of that. I'm going to start with some barbs that are maybe not quite as long as I want. I want most of these barbs here that are going to be the outside of that collar to be about halfway down the shoulder here. And generally, when they say just a few turns, that's what they mean is just a few. So I'll probably only get 2 to 3 turns in here. Gonna anchor that down. I like to leave my thread back towards the rear portion here so that as I'm wrapping this forward, the thread can actually push the materials rearward to make certain they're seated next to each other, and it will advance the thread forward for me. Take your time with this step. A lot of times it's kind of a tightrope between putting enough pressure to fold those barbs back without actually pulling that hackle out. So that's about it for me. I think I'll just get 3 wraps on that. I'll trim away the excess here. And then all you're going to do is sweep all of this back and just clean up that head. You're going to want to make certain you don't have any of the yellow barbs or anything showing through that. It's all nice and uniform black, and it has a nice shape to it. Again, I have not found any documentation yet in terms of just how wide, Carrie Stevens liked to have the heads of these. So usually I just kind of do it by look and feel what I'm looking for. With that done, I'll go ahead and put in a whip finish. Now, normally I would put on, to finish this off, I use some Fly Tight, which is a alcohol-based head cement. It's a much thinner head cement and it soaks down in those threads and really solidifies everything. So that's my first step. But because I'd have to wait for that to dry here to do the next step, I'm going to put on, I'm just going to go right to that. I'm going to use some Vineyard's clear Celire. And this stuff can be kind of hard to get to. It's just a clear lacquer. I actually used to use Wapsi's lacquer all the time. It was very, very good, but they discontinued that a few years back. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and put a couple of coats. I'll put one right now. And this is more for protection for the threads than it is. You're not really trying to build up a glossy head to it. You certainly could if you wanted to. Again, if you're going to do this as a presentation fly or something, maybe you like the look, that's what you want to do. But generally, it's just there for the protecting of the threads. So that is the Dr. White. And I will clear some space out here and show you how I actually manage or how I work with the material to actually create the wings.
I'll say at this point, I'll say that's a beautiful fly. I really love the colors. That pink gives a little bit of some gill kind of look to it.
Yeah.
And if anybody has any questions at this point, please speak up now and ask them.
Yeah. If you do about the fly and the fly tying, go ahead and chime on in.
Yeah, Eric or Ian.
Yeah.
I noticed that a lot of people that tie salmon flies and these long trout flies, streamers, use that same hooks with that same eye, that open eye that you have to close up with thread.
Yeah.
Why that eye instead of a regular eye? What we refer to as a regular eye.
I think it's more kind of a traditional thing. These eyes actually were made because they were much easier to make back in the day than what we call the more modern loop eye. And I think it's just a throwback to tradition. You look at a lot of your black salmon hooks for your classic Atlantic salmons. A lot of those will have that folded back looped eye. A return eye is what it's actually called, as opposed to the loop eye. And again, I think it's more tradition, just like originally there were no eyes on them. It was some sort of catgut or something like that was lashed down that you would attach your tippet to.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Now, in this one, again, I just chose this model of hook because of the large size. There is a Partridge CS5-9X, which is not a return eye hook like this. It's just a regular loop eye. And on some of the videos on my YouTube channel, different ones, I've used that mostly because of the fact that the hackles that I have aren't that long. This is a video I'll be doing soon called The Gray Lady. And here, I'll show you. And this is actually on one of those CS5-9X hooks. And you can see that's just a regular, see if I can't, there you go. That's just a regular loop eye to it. So it's not, you don't have to tie on these. Any other questions? Okay. So what I wanted to do, and Mike, let me know if I'm going long here or whatever. You got other things to do.
We're fine. Go as long as you want. And if people need to drop off, they can, but
okay. That's what I thought.
Do what you need to do.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got this thing until midnight if you want to stay that.
Okay. what I wanted to do, and I've got 2 or 3 videos out on my YouTube channel on how I prep these wings. Keeping in mind the specific recipe will direct you also on some of these, because not all of them have shoulders. Almost all of them will have a cheek of jungle cock. There's a few that don't. But these are just, again, a whiting American rooster saddle hackle right here. I like the saddles better because they have a little bit narrower taper, but the capes will also work very, very well for this. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to pick a couple of feathers here. I've got the hook that I'm going to tie on. You want the tips of that to go about 3/8 of an inch past the bend. So you're going to want to make certain that you have clean barbules or barbs here on off the rachis and not a lot of this fluffy stuff. Now, I don't mind occasionally if I tie one of these and I get some of this fluff in there. But for the most part, I think you want it to look a little bit cleaner. So what I usually do is I'll set a hook down in front of me, the size that I'm going to tie on, and I'll take a look at the feather. I'll start by trimming way off the end here, getting rid of that, because I know most of this fluff I'm going to get rid of. And then I'm going to take a look at it. If I tied that in like that, this is way too long. So I need to take some more off here to get the overall hackle to the right size for the wing. And that's still just a little bit too long. Keeping in mind, if I were tying this fly, I'm actually going to be doing 4 of these hackles because there's 2 on each side. So that's about the right length right there. When I am prepping for the videos that I do, I generally will tie 5 or 6 of each streamer. So I've got all these plucked and sitting here across my desk, and I start processing them, all of them like this. Once I have one down, I basically have the length I need for all the others. I can just cut that away and start peeling this off. And now I just want to make certain I'm measuring this against the first feather. Try and keep my hands out of the way there. And the more you do this, the easier it is in terms of gauging, and it actually goes fairly quick. But again, let me turn it this way. I'll take a look at that, and this one's still a little bit long. So I'll take a little bit more off like that. And that generally is going to get me the length that I'm looking for. So now I have the 2 hackles that are going to go on one side all prepped. The nice thing is, once you get that done, getting the shoulder done is really, really easy, because the shoulder,
Ian, do you take 2 feathers off of one side of the cape and 2 feathers off the other side to make them curve correctly?
You can do that. There are what I found with the whiting Americans, you don't have to do that.
Good.
Now there are some, if these are too narrow in here, then these will droop a lot. And sometimes you want to get them from opposite sides here. I'm not showing that right. They're going to droop like this. So often you want to get them from opposite sides, so that if both of these are drooping like this and the others are drooping the other way, then you tie them in so that droop kind of gets canceled out.
Right.
That makes some sense. I find that generally I don't have to with the whiting. I can pull them off from the center or from one side or the other. Sometimes when you're selecting them, you will have some that just kind of go off wild, and you don't want to use those. But again, it depends on the neck or the saddle that you have. So the shoulder is basically going to go about halfway down the actual wing. It depends. She's got a few other patterns that have a very large shoulder. but I find most of them, depending if it's a mallard flank or in this case, the jungle cock body feather, it goes about halfway down. So with this, you're going to kind of do the same thing. You're going to start peeling off some of this fluff stuff here that you know you don't need, and just start holding that up there and slowly remove what you don't need until you get this to just about the right size that you're looking for. Once again, I'm going to switch over here real quick. Once again, if you already have some of these done, then you can just hold this up against a previous feather that you worked with and see that that's pretty much the length that you're looking for. So there's going to be the shoulder. Jungle cock, it really depends on the eyes that you get and the quality of the eyes in terms of where you're going to tie that in. I generally always tie in the jungle cock somewhere right around the bottom of this lower white band. So that means I'm going to peel off the barbs from the rachis here to where I get that fairly clean. Now, if you have a lot of extra barbs on the sides, trying to do this without blocking your view, sometimes you get a lot of barbs right here on the side of the jungle cock. You can peel some of those off, but generally you're going to be peeling some of this lower white off too. I just prefer to go ahead and leave them. It will, in this case, all blend in. There is one thing, a trick I'll show you here, and that is in repairing jungle cock eyes. I can tell you in the last 20 years that I've been tying flies like this and some of the classics, I think I got one cape of jungle cock that had very few nails that were split on it. And I don't know if there's a quality issue these days or whatever, but almost every cape that I purchase has got a whole bunch of splits. And by splits, I mean, you can see that the very end of this right here has got just, it's cracked more or less. Since we're going to be using some rubber cement here to glue this together, it's very easy. This is also, when I'm doing my wings, the first step that I do, because I'll get all the jungle cock out, and all of these, I'm pretty much going to prep these the same way. So I'll have a bunch of them out, and I'll repair the backside of this nail first, taking just a little bit of rubber cement. This is just Elmer's rubber cement. And I'm just going to run this right down the back side here. And then I'm going to press this between my fingers and then just pull this through. And generally what that will do, the very tips may still be a little ragged, but if you were to have a split that ran, say, from the tip all the way halfway down, it's going to seal that up. It's going to bring them together, and it's going to glue that together. I don't know how well that's going to hold when you're fishing it. As we know, no flies are bomb-proof, so eventually it's going to get busted up. But at least, when you're tying it now, it's all going to look much better. And you could even work to get the tips right there closed up a little bit if you wanted. But the interesting thing is, Carrie Stevens had developed this process for pre-making her wings, and which is what I'm doing right here. And there's different thoughts as to why she did that. I think one of the maybe even the primary reason that she did it, she looked at this as a career, as a business. This is what she was doing, and therefore, how can she make it more efficient? How can she make it so that when she gets an order for a certain amount of Blue Devils or whatever, she can grab bodies that maybe are pre-done and then go grab some pre-made wings, and then she just got to tie them together and finish them, as opposed to a half a dozen of these from start to finish. I think that's the primary reason. However, I think also, like I mentioned earlier, by having this section kind of glued in the wing, it stiffens up this whole end here, and then the back end flutters much more when it's swimming. So I think it kind of solved two problems and had two benefits to it. But the process for this is fairly simple. Again, I use the rubber cement. There's been different articles written on different things that you can use. I don't know what lacquer it was that Carrie Stevens used on this, or even to finish the heads of her flies. But Don Bastian, and I will get you a link to this. Don Bastian's got a old blog out there. You can search for Carrie Stevens and rubber cement in it. He's got a great article in there about how he started using the rubber cement, and not only did it function and do all the things you wanted, but it was extremely durable. So even after catching a number of fish, the wings weren't all falling apart. But all I'm going to do is, generally when I'm doing this, I'll lay everything out, because as I said before, I generally will have, 4 sets of wings, 2 shoulders, and 2 jungle cock eyes here. I'll lay it all out so that I'm doing this all in the same order, where I'm going to take the first feather right here. I'm going to put a little bit of rubber cement on it, and I'm going to put that right down the rachis right here, just maybe about as far down as that jungle cock is going to eventually go. And then I'm going to take the second feather here and bringing this down. I hope you can see all of this well. Bringing this down over my thumb to keep it kind of separated, I'll even up the base of that. Now, once I get this evened, I actually have a little bit of a gap in my fingers right here, because I don't want that glue necessarily touching, because at this point, I can still pick this feather up and I can massage this so that the 2 rachises are going right down in line with each other. At that point, then I'm going to reach up with my thumb and index finger and I'm going to squish that together. It's going to hold it together just for a second. It's going to squish some of that rubber cement down around the base of those barbs, and it's just going to hold a little bit better. Then I'm going to hold the feather back further again, and I'm going to repeat the process with the shoulder. And that's just putting a little bit of rubber cement. My rubber cement's getting a little dry. A little bit of rubber cement right along the rachis there. Again, bringing this down, if you can see this, I bring it down over my thumb so that it doesn't dip into that rubber cement, and I can get the base of that evened up. And then again, in this case, I get the shoulder feather in line with the rachis. I can still kind of move that around, and then I'm going to just gently press those 2 together for just a second. I highly recommend you have a rag or something sitting on your leg, or just some old jeans, because you're going to be wiping rubber cement off your fingers a lot. So then the last one is to put a little bit more on here like this, and then you're going to put the jungle cock on. And again, I will bring that down this way to get this white portion right here, right where I want it. Gently hold the stems of those rachises together, and then I'll gently press those together. Now, if in this case the jungle cock eye went off just a little bit, you could maybe push that a little bit to get it back in line. I don't think, especially if it's a fishing fly, that it's going to be that big of a deal if the eye is up or down at a little bit of an angle. But as you can see, the whole wing is constructed now, or at least one side of it. You can see where the rubber cement is down in here, and it's all down in around the base of these barbs right here, and all the way through up into that jungle cock. That means that once I set this aside, a few hours later, it's nice and dry, then I've got a nice solid wing for tying in, which is much, much easier. So anybody have any questions about that process? It certainly is going to vary on for each recipe in terms of the hackles that you have in here. Some of them will have like 2 white hackles, and she might have a yellow hackle or a blue hackle that's shorter. So you would basically just put that in there, then the shoulder, and then the cheek, and so on.
Yeah, Ian, one quick question. As you know, jungle cock is getting very, very hard to find. Have you
Uh-huh.
explored alternatives to the jungle cock?
I have, and if I was going to tie some, just I knew that I was going to go fishing, and I really didn't care. There are some synthetic laser printed ones that are pretty good. Um, I didn't never really liked the ones they came out with. Wapsi came out with the printed ones about 20 years ago that are small. They're made more for like wet flies. Never really liked the look of those, and they fade real bad. Um, a lot of these flies, I think you could probably go ahead and just not put the jungle cock in. I think that they would fish just as well.
I
Or
think with a fly like this, I think if you find there's certain starling that has it might have like a white tip on the end,
yeah,
but it would be like a black feather similar to the body feather that
yeah.
is but it would have some barring and some spots on it. I've heard starling is kind of a real cheap alternative, but where do you get your jungle cock?
Well, there's a couple of different places. Moonlight Feathers. A number of years ago, I bought a couple of necks from them. Then the price went up, and they're harder to get, but they do have some, and they also sell smaller packets of jungle cock. There's a guy on Instagram. I can't remember his name right now. He sells them. He gets a lot of different feathers and posts that he has them for sale. Mike, I'll get you that information so we can put that in the description if you want to follow him. He usually has some very good necks. The other thing is look on eBay. eBay's a great place. Interesting little story a number of years ago. I was teaching this young woman how to tie flies in my beginning class. And she had a father who was disabled, and he would sit on eBay all day long, looking at stuff and perusing and buying stuff and this and that. And every now and again, he'd run across a full jungle cock cape for like $25. Somebody selling it who didn't know what they had. So he'd buy these up. Well, she came into class and wanted to learn a couple of flies specifically, and I took the time to show her. So she gives me this whole jungle cock cape, which was easily $75, $80 worth for free, just to say thank you. So keep an eye on eBay. You'll have to find some good things out there.
Right.
I want to real quick while I'm thinking about it. I did want to, Mike. I think you're right. The starling, if it's harvested in the wintertime, has the nice white tips to the feathers. But I just thought of it, you could put a longer one on here with the white tips here, and then a shorter one here with the white tips back here.
Oh, right.
So that would give you kind of the same profile. That's a good idea.
Right. If I could shoot them in my neighborhood, my daughter got us a bird feeder with a camera on it.
Oh, yeah.
And so I've seen some starlings on there lately that are just, I wish I could just push a button and zap them and then go out and pick them up.
Yeah,
But,
we have a bunch of those too.
Right. Anybody else have any questions?